My name is Antonio, and what I'm about to share is not easy for me. For years, I've kept this story hidden, fearing disbelief or the judgment that I might be perceived as mad. But the truth is, after everything that has transpired, the opinions of others no longer hold the same weight. What matters now is that someone listens. Perhaps, just perhaps, this will help prevent another person from making the same mistake I did. I owned a gas station, or at least that's what defined me until this all unfolded. My father built the station, a man of simple dedication and hard work, who always told me, "Success comes from effort, Antonio, never take shortcuts." I truly believed in those words. I grew up assisting my father, fueling cars and cleaning pumps, and when he passed away, I proudly took over the business. For years, everything was fine. It wasn't a business that made me rich, but it paid the bills, put food on the table, and, most importantly, made me feel worthy. But life has a cruel way of testing us, doesn't it? Everything changed when Roberto, a younger man brimming with ambition, opened a new station across the street. His station was everything mine wasn't: modern, attractive, and filled with promotions I could never match. Within weeks, I saw my business plummet. Customers who used to chat with me while fueling their vehicles now pulled into his. Some even seemed to pity me as they drove past my now empty station. Initially, I tried to compete fairly. I lowered prices, offered simple incentives, but nothing worked. Roberto seemed to always be one step ahead, as if he knew what I was doing before I even decided. This began to take a toll on me. Sleepless nights were spent pondering how to save the business my father had spent years building. The worst part wasn't the failure, it was the shame. I felt small, defeated, as if I were betraying my family's legacy. Then, I began to hear whispers. People at the bar were discussing that Roberto wasn't as clean as he appeared. Some said he had performed rituals to attract fortune. Others spoke of offerings he left at crossroads in the dead of night. I didn't know what was true and what was mere gossip, but it gnawed at me. What if it was true? What if he was using something beyond human effort? I can't say if curiosity or despair led me to what happened next. Perhaps a bit of both. I'd always heard tales of powerful entities like Exu Caveira, someone who could open impossible paths for those willing to pay the price. My grandmother, a devout follower of saints and orishas, always cautioned, "Never summon what you cannot control, Antonio." But by then, I was beyond reason. I just wanted a solution. It was one of those nights while drinking in an empty bar that I met someone who seemed to understand exactly what I was going through. He was a thin man with deep-set eyes and a voice that seemed to penetrate your mind. He listened silently as I poured out my frustrations about Roberto, the station, and my impending ruin. When I finished, he smiled, but it wasn't an ordinary smile. There was something unsettling, something that made me shiver. "If you want to resolve this, there is a way," he said calmly. I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. And he did, but the words that followed would forever alter my life. Roberto arrived seemingly unassuming, but quickly demonstrated his considerable knowledge. He was young, with that confident smile of someone who believes nothing can go wrong. His new station appeared almost overnight, as if meticulously planned for months. When the sign was erected and the pumps began operating, I realized something was about to change. His station was different from mine. Where mine had that family business feel, his was clean, gleaming, equipped with technology I'd only seen in large cities. The pumps were digital, the employees wore immaculate uniforms, and he offered promotions that seemed plucked from a television commercial. Low prices, discounts for fleets, and even free car washes for loyal customers. It wasn't long before cars began diverting from my station and pulling into his. The first time I saw my lot empty was like a punch to the stomach. I looked out the convenience store window and all I saw was the wind whipping the old flag atop the main pump. Meanwhile, across the street, Roberto was smiling, shaking hands with customers who emerged with full tanks and even more inflated egos. It wasn't just his success that bothered me, it was the way. He was overly confident, as if he knew I could never defeat him. Sometimes our eyes met, and I swore there was a hint of provocation in his gaze. He didn't need to say a word. The air of superiority clung to every gesture, every laugh. It was grinding me down. People started talking. "Did you see the new gas station? It's like something out of a movie," they'd say. Others approached me with feigned sympathy, as if trying to comfort me. "Antonio, perhaps it's time to modernize, don't you think?" As if I didn't know, as if I didn't want to. But modernization cost money, and money was something I lacked. Each malfunctioning pump, each aging piece of equipment served only to remind me that I was battling a seemingly insurmountable foe. It was then that I heard the first whispers about Roberto. They said he possessed an improbable fortune, one exceeding his efforts. Some swore they'd seen him at crossroads in the dead of night, leaving offerings. Others spoke of his visits to a renowned spiritual center in the neighboring town, known for its potent rituals. I'd never been one to believe everything I heard, but these stories began to unsettle me. What if it were true? One night, after another fruitless day, I decided to go to the town's bar. I needed a respite from the station, from the mounting debts, from the shame. There, amidst the hushed conversations about Roberto, I realized the extent of my predicament. Each word, each laugh about his success felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I was losing everything while he was gaining. Something had to change. I just didn't know how. That night, the answers I sought were poised to emerge, and I was about to cross a point of no return. I never imagined the crushing weight of powerlessness could be so profound. Initially, I believed that increased effort would rectify the situation. But as days morphed into weeks and the station's traffic continued to dwindle, I understood the problem was far greater than my individual capacity. My empty lot served as a mirror, reflecting not only my business failures, but also my personal failings. Bills piled up, an unwelcome sight I avoided. Suppliers called daily, and the bank had begun issuing overdue notices. At night, I'd sit at the kitchen table with an old calculator, attempting to find solutions in the numbers, but the figures never balanced. I knew that if this trend persisted, it was only a matter of time before everything crumbled. Worse still was the humiliation, not just of failing, but of appearing weak. Each customer who veered away from my station to fuel up at Roberto's chipped away at my pride. His smiles, his confidence, all served to reinforce my sense of defeat. It wasn't just about the money, it was about what the station represented. To me, it was my father's legacy, a lifetime of work, and I was losing it. During one sleepless night, I began to reflect on the stories I had heard. My grandmother had always said that when all else fails, the crossroads offer a path. She, a woman of profound wisdom and devotion to saints and spirits, was well versed in these traditions. I recalled her showing me how to light a white candle to seek protection when I was young. "But be careful, Antonio," she'd warned. "There are forces you should not summon unless you are prepared for the price they demand." At the time, her words sounded like tales to scare children. But now, in my current predicament, they echoed with an undeniable weight. I remembered the rumors about Roberto, the offerings, the rituals at the spiritual center. Whether true or not, it mattered little. He was winning and I was losing. Was there a way to change this? I started to wonder how far I was willing to go. The idea of seeking spiritual guidance had never crossed my mind before. I had always been a practical man of simple faith, but desperation does extraordinary things to us. It pushes you to places you never imagined you'd venture. And I was being propelled. A thought began to take root. If Roberto could harness other forces to succeed, why couldn't I? Perhaps it wasn't fair, but I was tired of losing, tired of being the underdog, the defeated. For the first time, I considered the possibility of doing something my father would never approve of. I just didn't know how yet. This train of thought led me back to that night at the bar, where everything began to change. Sitting at the counter with a forgotten drink in my hand, I felt as though I had reached the bottom of the abyss. And then a man appeared. He sat beside me, calm, almost invisible in the midst of the noisy environment. He wasn't like the other patrons. There was something about him, a way of observing, as if he knew more than he should. When he finally spoke, it seemed as if he had been waiting for the opportune moment. "You seem to be carrying the weight of the world," he said. And somehow I knew he wasn't just another stranger. That man didn't look any different from any other patron in the bar, but there was something about him that unsettled me. He was thin, with pale skin, and wore simple yet impeccable clothes. His eyes were deep-set, almost as if he hadn't slept in days, but they shone with an unnerving intensity. When he first spoke to me, it was as if he already knew everything I was thinking. "You seem to be carrying the weight of the world," he said, stirring his drink. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to respond. Perhaps it was his calm demeanor, or perhaps it was the desperation that made me seek any glimmer of hope. "It's the business, isn't it? The family business," he continued before I could utter a word. That took me aback. How did he know about my business? I didn't recognize him. I'd never seen him in town before. Yet he knew. "You're losing to that other one, Roberto. It's unfair, don't you think?" He didn't look me directly in the eyes. He spoke while slowly stirring the ice in his glass, as if what he was saying were the most casual thing in the world. I felt exposed, as if he were reading my mind. I didn't immediately respond, but he continued. "You see, there are ways to balance the scales. Not everything needs to be decided by force or money. There are alternative paths." His voice was calm, but each word seemed to weigh heavily in the air. I laughed, trying to mask my unease. "What do you mean by alternative paths?" He paused for a moment, took a sip of his drink, and finally met my gaze. "I'm talking about assistance, Antonio. Assistance from those with true power. Have you ever heard of Exu Caveira?" The name sent a shiver down my spine. I had heard of him, of course. My grandmother used to tell stories about him. Guardian of crossroads, just but merciless. According to her, Exu Caveira was an entity that opened paths for those in despair, but the price was always high. "Is this serious?" I asked, trying not to sound frightened. He smiled. "Very serious. You're at a crossroads, Antonio, and Exu Caveira is the one who can help you. But I must warn you, he gives nothing for free. If you truly wish to follow this path, you must be willing to pay the price." I should have gotten up and left at that moment, but something held me back. Perhaps it was the desperation. Perhaps it was the promise of a solution. "And how does it work?" I asked hesitantly. He explained with almost surgical calm every detail of the ritual. Black candles, a bottle of cachaça, cigars, and raw meat. Everything needed to be taken to a specific place, the town cemetery, at midnight. There I would make my offering and ask Exu Caveira directly for what I wanted. He made it clear that this was no game. "You must be certain, Antonio. Once he appears, there's no turning back, and the price will be collected sooner or later." I should have taken this as a warning, but in my mind, it seemed like a risk I was willing to take. What else did I have to lose? He left the bar before I could ask any further questions. When I looked back, the man was gone, as if he had vanished into thin air. All that remained was the weight of his words in my mind. That night, I couldn't sleep. His words echoed in my head, and the idea of seeking Exu Caveira's help began to feel more real. I was at my limit, and what he offered was more than hope. It was a chance. I just didn't know that, by accepting, I was opening the door to something I could never control. When the clock struck 11:30, I gathered everything. The mysterious man had said I would need black candles, a bottle of cachaça, cigars, and a piece of raw meat. Each item felt heavier than it should, as if they carried the weight of the decision I was about to make. At that moment, I could still back out. I could still go home and face my ruin without crossing that line. But somehow, my body seemed to act on its own, guided by something I couldn't explain. The town cemetery was secluded atop a hill. The wind sliced through the night, whistling through the twisted trees that lined the rusted iron gate. It was a place I'd always avoided, but that night it seemed to call to me. Each step echoed against the silence, and the sound of dry leaves beneath my feet seemed too loud, as if I were being watched. I followed the instructions precisely. I chose a more secluded area where the crosses were worn by time, some almost falling. There, the air felt heavier, as if it carried the history of everything that place had witnessed. I knelt on the cold ground, careful not to touch the graves. "Respect the dead," my grandmother used to say. "They could be your allies or your foes, depending on how you treat them." I placed the items on the ground, forming a small circle, and lit the candles. The flickering flame illuminated the names carved on the nearby tombstones, but offered no warmth. The scent of melting wax mingled with that of raw meat and cachaça, creating a peculiar, almost nauseating aroma. For a moment, everything fell silent. Even the wind seemed to cease. I took a deep breath and recited the words the man had taught me, striving to keep my voice steady despite the fear constricting my chest. "Exu Caveira, guardian of souls and crossroads, I seek your aid." My voice sounded small in the emptiness, but I continued. "I bring these offerings as a sign of respect and ask that you open the paths for me." As I spoke, a shiver ran down my spine, as if something unseen was drawing near. The wind returned, but this time it was icy and sharp. The candle flames danced, almost extinguishing, yet held firm, illuminating something that had not been there before. A shadow. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks, but the shadow began to move, even without anything to cast it. It was tall and slender, with outlines that seemed to hover between the real world and something beyond. The smell of sulfur filled the air, thick and suffocating. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt tight. Then I heard it, not with my ears, but within my mind. The voice was grave, deep, like the echo of something from the bottom of a cavern. "You called to me, Antonio. I am here." My breath grew heavy, as if the air around me had transformed into lead. I could not see a face, only feel a presence, powerful, imposing. "You wish to vanquish your adversary. You crave your victory, your success restored." The voice paused, as if savoring each word. "But nothing in my domain is free. Are you willing to pay the price?" I had no doubts at that moment. My mind had already decided, even before he asked. "Yes," I replied, my voice trembling. He did not laugh, did not make grand gestures. He merely extended a hand, or something that resembled a hand. "A drop of blood, a pact forged with your will. What you ask for will be done. But remember, Antonio, every debt will be collected." My hands trembled as I took a small blade he indicated amongst the offerings. A swift cut to my finger, and a single drop of blood fell upon the raw meat. The wind howled fiercely, extinguishing the candles all at once. When I looked up, he was gone. All that remained was darkness and a sense that I had crossed a boundary I could never undo. The days following the ritual were strangely tranquil. At first, I began to doubt everything. Perhaps I was so desperate that I imagined things in the cemetery. Perhaps it was just a frantic night, and the feeling of presence was the product of my weary mind. But something within me knew it was not just that. Something had changed. In the first week, I began to hear whispers. Roberto's station, which always seemed impeccable, had encountered unexpected problems. A fuel pump had leaked and had to be shut down. Some customers started complaining that their cars had sustained damage after refueling there. They were minor incidents, but enough to sow distrust. And this was only the beginning. In the second week, things escalated. A mysterious fire destroyed part of Roberto's convenience store during the night. No one could determine the origin. What was once a place overflowing with confidence and activity now seemed marked by chaos. When I first passed by after the fire, I saw Roberto outside speaking with a fireman. He looked weary, exhausted. For the first time, his confident smile had vanished. Meanwhile, my station began to thrive again. Cars returned, as if an unseen magnet was drawing them to me. My employees seemed more motivated, and even the equipment, previously worn, performed better than ever. The smiles and conversations of customers, which had disappeared for months, now filled the lot again. It was as if I had been reborn, but something was not right. As much as I tried to convince myself that it was just a stroke of luck, there were signs that my victory was not entirely natural. One night, while closing the register, I heard footsteps in the lot. I looked out the window, but there was no one there. Again, the lights on the pumps flickered erratically, as if something was disturbing them. I tried to ignore it, but a strange feeling began to grow within me. It was as if the station now had a life of its own. The customers noticed, too. Some started commenting that the station had a different energy. A disconcerting chill washed over a gas station attendant as he filled his vehicle. Another customer recounted a similar experience, describing how his young daughter had pointed at the station's yard, exclaiming, "Who is that man?" There was no one there. Each account unnerved me further, yet I feigned indifference. After all, I was winning. And in that moment, that was all that mattered. By the third week, Roberto's decline was unmistakable. He could no longer compete. His station stood vacant, while mine overflowed with activity. People had forgotten the extent of his former market dominance. Now, everything seemed to return to a state of normalcy. But for me, nothing felt normal. One evening, after closing the station, I stood in the yard gazing at the pumps. It should have been a moment of relief, perhaps even celebration. I had triumphed. Yet deep down, I felt a growing emptiness, as if alongside my success, something else had taken root there. Something unseen, yet undeniably present. For the first time I questioned, was it worth it? In that instant, everything seemed to fall back into place. The station buzzed with activity, as it had in the old days, and I felt a sense of vindication. Roberto, once so confident and proud, now avoided even glancing my way. He was a shadow of his former self, but deep within, I knew something was amiss. Because, despite the success, the feeling of victory remained incomplete. The first night I stayed late closing, I noticed the first signs. As I stowed tools in the small workshop at the back, I heard footsteps in the yard. A clear, distinct sound, as if someone were walking among the pumps. I assumed it was a late customer, but when I stepped outside, the yard was empty, save for the shadows cast by the fluorescent lights. A heavy weight settled in my chest, but I dismissed it. I convinced myself that I was simply tired, that my mind was playing tricks on me. The following nights grew stranger. The pump lights began to flicker erratically. An occasional, unexplained, sulphurous odor wafted through the air. Subtle, yet enough to evoke the ritual. I knew what it was. I knew, but I wouldn't admit it. Nightmares soon followed. At first, fleeting images. A figure standing in the corner of my room, eyes watching. From afar, whispers echoing in my mind. But they intensified. In one dream, I found myself back at the cemetery, surrounded by empty graves. The same low, resonant voice from the ritual echoed, "The price will be collected, Antonio. Always." I awoke drenched in sweat, heart pounding, my sense of tranquility shattered. The feeling of being watched wasn't confined to my dreams. During the day at the station, I felt unseen eyes following me, as if something or someone was always present. Sometimes, faint laughter emanated from the storage room, yet no one was there. Customers began to notice. A man asked if I was all right, saying I seemed to be constantly looking behind me. A customer claimed to feel a strange presence while fueling her car. I offered excuses, attributing it to fatigue or her paranoia, but my fear grew within. Visits to the cemetery began to appear in my thoughts, as if something was pulling me back there. During the wee hours, a soft voice, like a distant echo, would call out to me, "Return, Antonio, return." I knew I should never go back, but the call was almost irresistible. The worst came when I began to see apparitions. Initially, fleeting glimpses, like light and shadow games. But one night, as I was closing the register, I saw a distinct figure, standing near the pumps, tall, thin, its gaze fixed on me. When I looked again, it was gone, but the sulphurous smell lingered in the air for several minutes. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, but I knew the truth. The pact had a price, and it was beginning to be collected. My sleep deteriorated, my appetite waned, and even the success of the station seemed to lose its luster. All I had achieved was there, but at what cost? The weight of regret began to outweigh the relief of having vanquished Roberto. I longed to turn back time, to never have made that deal, but it was too late. The price was being collected, and I knew there was no escape. The station continued to thrive. The pumps were always full, customers seemed satisfied, and money flowed in like never before, but none of it mattered to me. I felt no joy, only a growing emptiness. As each day passed, the price of the pact drew me further into an inescapable darkness. The nights were the worst. My room, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. Fluctuations in the wall's shadows seemed to dance, morphing with each fleeting glance. An absolute hush was punctuated by whispers that emanated from every corner, yet vanished as soon as I sought to pinpoint their origin. I sealed the windows, bolted the doors, but the sensation of being watched persisted. Nightmares began to bleed into reality. One night I dreamt I was at the station, all the pumps open, fuel seeping onto the ground. In the center of the courtyard, the same figure I'd seen during the ritual, tall, slender, enveloped by a pulsating shadow. It stared at me, unmoving. When I awoke, my room reeked of sulfur, and the clock read precisely midnight. During the day, matters were no better. I noticed customers, without uttering a word, appearing uneasy. Some regarded the pumps as if something were amiss. Once, a child pointed towards the courtyard, asking their mother, "Why is that man crying?" I saw no one there, but the query sent shivers down my spine. I sought answers. I visited a local spiritual center, posing as an inquisitive observer, hoping someone could offer assistance. The priest, a seasoned man, gazed at me for a considerable time before speaking. "You've interfered with something beyond your control, haven't you?" I swallowed hard, my head nodding involuntarily, unable to lie. He sighed, as if already aware of the truth. "The crossroads always collects what is owed, my son. What's done cannot be undone without a greater price." His words struck me like a physical blow. There was no escape. everything I'd done to reclaim. The station now seemed insignificant in the face of what I was confronting. The peace I'd so diligently pursued throughout my life seemed to vanish forever. I began to avoid spending extended periods at the station, especially at night. The place's energy felt heavy, suffocating. Yet wherever I went, the feeling of being watched followed me. There was no safe haven, no respite. Even at home, I heard whispers in the hallway and footsteps that never seemed to approach, yet never receded. The worst part was knowing I was the architect of my own torment. Despite my attempts to justify my decision, the desperation, the need to save the business, I knew I'd crossed a line that should never have been breached. The success I'd achieved came at the cost of my tranquility, a burden that consumed me. It was then I realized that no matter how great the success, it could never replace inner peace. And the price I was paying wasn't just spiritual, but mental. Each day felt longer, each night darker. I craved a rewind, but knew it was impossible. All I could do was wait and fear what was to come. Time passed, yet the torment worsened. Each day felt more stifling, each night longer and emptier. The feeling of being watched became constant, regardless of my location. At the station, at home, on the street, that presence was always there, silent yet inescapable. My visions intensified. One pre-dawn hour, while reviewing the station's accounts, I saw that shadowy figure again in the courtyard, standing between the pumps. This time, it was clearer, almost tangible. Tall, lean, with an aura that seemed to suck the light from its surroundings. I blinked and it vanished, but the sulphurous odor remained so potent I nearly vomited. I could no longer pretend everything was all right. My employees began to notice. A cashier commented that the station's lights flickered whenever I arrived, as if something accompanied me. Another employee resigned, stating the atmosphere was charged. Even loyal customers began to disappear, claiming the station gave them a bad feeling, as if an unseen entity was observing them. The nights became unbearable. One, I awoke with the sensation of hands gripping me, squeezing my neck. When I opened my eyes, no one was there, but the pressure was so real I gasped for air for minutes, unable to move. It was as if it was trying to remind me, I am here. I will always be here. My reflection in the mirror began to frighten me. It wasn't just fatigue or dark circles. There was something in my eyes, a void I didn't recognize. I looked at myself and barely saw myself anymore. It was as if, little by little, I was losing who I was. Even my name seemed distant, irrelevant. In a desperate attempt to find solace, I returned to the spiritual center. The priest received me with a heavy gaze, as if already knowing my plight. "You cannot escape this, Antonio," he said, his voice low. "What is done is done. But you must understand, what surrounds you is not just retribution, it is the energy of the Pact." Her presence was now inextricably linked to me, a constant companion throughout my life. I pleaded, almost begging, for a solution, a way to undo the agreement. He regarded me intently before responding, "You can learn to live with this, but to completely sever the ties? No, my son, not without even worse repercussions." His words were a crushing blow. I left feeling condemned, utterly trapped, with no path back. Each passing day, the burden grew heavier. I knew peace would never return. That night, I had the most dreadful nightmare imaginable. I was in the heart of my station, encircled by flames. The shadowy figure stood before me, laughing, as tanks exploded one by one. "You sought this, Antonio," echoed the voice in my mind. "I delivered. Now it's your turn to fulfill your end." When I awoke, my room was frigid, and the clock showed, once again, midnight. Then I understood with absolute certainty that the pact I had made had not only stolen my peace, but had also imprisoned me. Worse still, I knew this was just the beginning. Today, my station flourishes. The tanks are always full, the cash register overflowing with profits, and customers continue to come, though now with a subdued silence. From the outside, it appears I've achieved everything a businessman could desire, but only I know the truth. Only I comprehend the daily price I pay. Nights, once a welcome respite after a long day, now constitute my greatest torment. The quiet of dawn is no longer a pause, but a wait. Whispers never cease. Sometimes they morph into muffled laughter, other times into unintelligible words, yet I know they are directed at me. The sulphurous odor appears suddenly without warning, permeating the air for minutes before vanishing. Shadows still pursue me, regardless of my location, at the station, at home, or even walking through the city. I feel them. Sometimes I catch a glimpse, fleeting and brief, in the corner of my eye, enough to send shivers down my spine. Other times, it's more direct. A figure standing still, observing me, motionless, as I try to pretend it isn't there. And whenever I close my eyes, even for a few seconds, the dark figure from the cemetery awaits me. Success, once my ultimate goal, now feels hollow. Each dollar that enters the register is a stark reminder of what I've lost. My peace, my sanity, my very identity. I have become a shell, someone who exists solely to keep a business running, while my spirit seems trapped in a debt I can never repay. I no longer seek help. After my last conversation with the spiritual advisor, I understood there is no escape. No ritual can undo what has been done. My life is bound to the pact, and whatever is pursuing me is also bound to it. I don't know how far this will go. I don't know if the price will ever be fully paid, or if it will continue until my last breath. I only know that since that day in the cemetery, I've never experienced a moment of tranquility. People still ask how I overcame the competition, how I transformed my station into such a rapid success. I merely smile, a hollow smile, and offer vague answers. Luck, I say, or hard work. But deep down, I know none of it is true. What happened to me has nothing to do with luck or effort. It's something from another realm, something I should never have invoked. And that is why I'm telling this story. Not because I believe it will change anything for me, but because I want you to understand. When you stand at a crossroads, when you feel there is no escape, consider carefully what you are willing to do. Because the price of a shortcut can be far greater than you imagine. And remember, evil never stays far away. It always finds its way back.